Your daughter's hair has become a problem, so we corrected it for you.
The words hit the air like a slap, sharp, smug, and delivered by a woman who thought her HOA badge made her untouchable. A child stood behind her, trembling, half-shaved, and trying not to cry. They said her appearance violated standards. They said she caused distraction. They said it was necessary. But the father didn't shout, didn't lunge, didn't break. He simply looked, long enough for every detail to burn into memory. And before this was over, the woman who enforced those rules would face consequences she never imagined. This wasn't about a haircut. It was about a line no one crosses. Before I show you the exact moment a federal badge lit up the HOA meeting and froze every smug face in the room. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What's happening beneath the surface is simple. Power was abused, and the wrong man stayed quiet. He stepped forward slowly, voice steady despite the storm building behind his eyes. The calmness unsettled the room more than anger ever could. He touched his daughter's shoulder, shielding her with the kind of steady presence that made everyone else seem small. He wasn't some rattled maintenance worker. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't confused. He was choosing silence, and silence from a man like that was never harmless. He knelt so he was eye level with the frightened girl. She tried to speak but couldn't. Her breath hitched, her hands shook. She clutched the shredded ends of her braid like it might somehow reattach itself if she just held tight enough. He didn't cry or panic. He simply listened as she struggled to explain how she was taken into a room she didn't understand, told the haircut was mandatory, and that refusing meant losing access to the community spaces she loved. The words tumbled out raw, jagged, broken by hiccups, but he absorbed each one with a kind of patience that bordered on terrifying. Gathering truth the way some men gather ammunition. He rose with a breath that didn't tremble. The others stared, waiting for outrage, expecting a scene, assuming the moment would break him. They had no idea who he used to be. They had no idea what kind of mind doesn't break under pressure, only becomes sharper. And he wasn't about to educate them with speeches. He gently guided his daughter toward their unit, walking slowly enough for her shaking legs to keep pace. The afternoon sun reflected off the manicured lawns, casting long shadows from the ornate lampposts, shadows that stretched across their path like a quiet warning. He wasn't intimidated. This place, with its perfect hedges and polished walkways, had never frightened him. What frightened him was the fear in his daughter's eyes. Inside the unit, she sat at the edge of her bed, tears slipping silently. He fetched a towel, wrapping it gently around her shoulders, brushing loose hair from her cheeks. She leaned into his side, seeking refuge in his steadiness. He whispered, reassurance, not promises of revenge, not empty threats, just the simple truth that she wasn't alone. Outside, footsteps passed, muffled voices drifting through the thin walls. The HOA wanted him rattled. They wanted him reactive. They wanted him to make a mistake they could weaponize. But he refused to give them anything. He closed the curtains slowly, observing first, acting later. That was his way. Always had been. He walked to the small dining table where an old spiral-bound notebook lay. It was plain, unremarkable, the kind of thing no one would ever pay attention to. Perfect. He flipped it open and began writing, cataloging every detail his daughter described. Time, location, exact words spoken. He traced the sequence of events with precision, constructing a timeline that would become impossible to discredit. The truth was a tool, and he had always been skilled at wielding tools. He paused only to glance at the cut pieces of hair still tangled in the towel. It wasn't just hair. It was the humiliation someone had chosen to carve into a child. A knock echoed at the door, sharp, authoritative, meant to intimidate. He didn't rush. He didn't call out. He walked to the door with measured steps, opened it just enough to see the folded violation notice taped neatly to the handle. Non-compliance fine, it read. Parent misconduct. A laugh escaped him, not loud, not mocking, just a small breath of disbelief at how predictable they were. He left the notice hanging. Let the neighbors see it. Let the community whisper. Every rumor they spread was another thread he'd pull later. Behind him, his daughter shifted, curling into herself on the couch. He returned to her, smoothing her hair, what was left of it, away from her face. She leaned into his touch, exhausted, humiliated, but safe. He looked around their modest unit, tools stacked neatly in the corner, work boots by the door, a lunchbox still half full on the counter. A humble life, a quiet life, and he had chosen it deliberately. Not because he was small, but because he was done with the noise of the world he used to serve. But some lines required breaking that quiet. Some lines demanded he step back into a role he'd buried. He didn't want vengeance. He didn't need validation. He wanted one thing: dignity restored for the child who trusted him above anyone else. He closed the notebook, placed his hand over the cover for a moment, and exhaled. This wasn't finished. It hadn't even begun. He kept his hand on the closed notebook for one more breath before rising. The room was quiet except for his daughter's soft, uneven breathing as she drifted into a restless sleep on the couch. He adjusted the towel around her shoulders, making sure the fabric didn't rub the raw spots on her scalp. Then he stood and moved toward the front door with that same collected precision that unsettled people who didn't know him well enough to fear him. The violation notice still hung from the handle, swinging slightly whenever the hallway draft stirred. He didn't remove it. Instead, he took out his phone and recorded it from multiple angles, timestamp visible, full wording in frame, the door number, and peeling paint behind it, capturing the reality of how some residents lived here versus the elite ones giving orders. He documented everything with quiet, practiced efficiency. When he stepped back inside, he locked the door softly. His daughter stirred but didn't wake. He returned to the table, opened the notebook, and placed the photo screenshots beside it. Step by step, line by line, he began building a foundation of truth. He had always believed evidence spoke louder than rage. Rage made people reckless. Evidence made people answer. He was still writing when a faint chime buzzed through the room. His maintenance work tablet lit up with a system notification. Admin access log, camera group, 3 offline, scheduled. Scheduled. That word alone told him everything. Someone wanted the footage buried, and they moved fast. He closed the tablet and leaned back. There was no surprise, no panic, just confirmation. His daughter shifted again, whimpering in her sleep. He walked to her, kneeling beside the couch. The towel had slipped, so he gently pulled it back up, tucking it beneath her chin. Her breathing steadied. For a moment, he let the ache settle in his chest, an ache he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. Then a soft knock broke the moment, not the sharp, aggressive knock from earlier. This one was hesitant. He opened the door a crack. Mrs. Alden, an elderly resident from down the hall, stood clutching a grocery bag. She glanced at the violation notice, then at him, guilt flickering across her features. I heard raised voices earlier," she whispered. "Is she all right?" He didn't speak right away. People filled silence with the truth they were afraid to say, and Mrs. Alden was no exception. "Vivienne didn't have permission to touch your child," she blurted. "I saw Mara walking with her. She looked afraid." A breath left him slowly, part relief, part sorrow. "Did anyone else see?" he asked. Mrs. Alden hesitated. "People don't want trouble here. They never do." He didn't pressure her. Fear shaped this place. Fear of fines, fear of losing privileges, fear of being targeted the way his daughter had been. Still, her statement mattered. Witness testimony mattered. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded, thrust the grocery bag at him awkwardly. "There's soup in here, for her. It might help." He accepted it, watching her retreat down the corridor with hurried steps. When he closed the door, he placed the soup carefully on the counter, not for the food, but because the act itself showed something the HOA could never erase. Someone had seen the truth. He returned to the notebook. A new section formed. Witness observation, Mrs. A. He wrote down her exact words, tone, hesitation, all the subtle cues he'd been trained long ago to read. Patterns mattered, motives mattered, fear mattered. Every detail built the same picture, and that picture pointed directly to someone who believed authority was protection. He took another breath and looked around their unit, the dim kitchen light, his daughter's small shoes by the door, the hum of the old refrigerator. He had chosen this life deliberately, traded medals and missions for quiet mornings and school pickups. But quiet didn't mean helpless. Quiet meant prepared. He poured the soup into a bowl, warming it in silence. His daughter woke at the scent. She blinked wearily, touching the side of her head before pulling her hand away with a wince. He knelt beside her again, setting the bowl on the coffee table. "You're safe," he said softly. Her eyes welled again. "Will they do something else?" He shook his head. "Not if I handle this right." She looked at him, trusting him with the kind of faith that made every sacrifice worth it. He wiped a tear from her cheek. "Eat a little. It'll help." She nodded and reached for the spoon. He stood again, returning to his notes. The retaliation strategy from the HOA was already unfolding. The false fines, rumors, camera suppression. They believed he would bend. They believed he would be overwhelmed. But they didn't understand who he was before the uniform shirt with a maintenance logo. They didn't know he'd spent years unraveling hostile networks far more complex than a suburban power trip. He was mid-sentence when the HOA app chimed with another notification. Mandatory community meeting. Attendance required tonight, 7 p.m. Interesting. Annual meeting, mandatory, witnesses guaranteed. The timing was perfect. He closed the notebook with a quiet finality. The path forward was taking shape with mathematical clarity. He didn't need to expose Vivian alone. He just needed the right stage. And they had just handed it to him. Subscribe with the bell on, because what happens next isn't something you want to miss. He checked on his daughter once more, then stepped toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to watch the neatly trimmed lawns and spotless walkways. The HOA loved appearances. He wondered how they would handle the truth when it appeared right in front of them. He let the curtain fall back into place, the fabric settling with a soft hush that matched the quiet resolve forming in his chest. The meeting notice still hovered on his tablet screen, glowing faintly in the dim room. A mandatory gathering meant faces, reactions, and, most importantly, pressure. Pressure made people reveal who they truly were. He had learned that in places far from this manicured neighborhood. His daughter finished a few spoonfuls of soup before setting the bowl aside. Her eyes were heavy, but her fear lingered just beneath the surface. He sat beside her, resting an arm lightly around her shoulders. "The meeting tonight," he said gently. "You won't have to go. I'll handle it." She nodded, relief loosening some of the tension in her small frame. "Will she be there?" she asked, voice wavering. "Yes." Her fingers curled into the towel, still wrapped around her neck. "I don't want her to look at me again." "You won't have to see her," he repeated. "I'll take care of everything." She trusted him. That trust was both his weight and his anchor. He helped her settle back down, tucking a blanket around her. She drifted off again, exhaustion pulling her under. Once her breathing steadied, he moved to the table and opened his notebook to a fresh page. The meeting notice changed things. There were patterns he could predict now. HOA leaders who believed themselves untouchable always sought public validation. They'd use the meeting to reinforce their power. Vivian, above all, would perform for the residents, expecting nods and agreement. It made tonight the perfect moment to expose her. He flipped to the earlier page with Mrs. Alden's observation, cross-referencing it with the timeline he'd constructed. The evidence was gaining shape. Witness remarks, violation notices, access log manipulation, child endangerment, the braid itself. All that remained was direct footage, something he couldn't access on his own. But the presence of mandatory attendance meant one thing. If the cameras had been tampered with, the truth of that tampering would surface under the right pressure. He added one more line under the meeting prep. Observe reactions, identify weak links. He didn't intend to confront Vivian tonight. Not directly. He wanted her comfortable, overconfident, certain she was in control. People like her always made their worst mistakes when they believed they'd already won. A soft vibration buzzed from the counter. The HOA app again. Another update? Due to high attendance, the meeting will be held in the main hall. Early seating recommended. He almost smiled. They were trying to impress the residents, make the evening feel important. She'd be dressed to dominate the room. He'd seen that type many times. He walked to the bathroom and washed his hands slowly, watching the water ripple away the faint dust and grime from earlier repairs. His reflection stared back, steady, unreadable, the face of a man who had built a life far calmer than the one he once lived. But the edges were still there beneath the surface. The training, the vigilance, the instinct for patterns and pressure points. He turned off the faucet and dried his hands, listening to the faint hum of the building. Through the thin wall, the muffled sound of neighbors talking drifted. People always whispered louder right before fear set in. Fear changed communities. It made room for truth. He returned to the living room, grabbing his work ID badge from the hook by the door. He wouldn't go to the meeting in anything more formal than his uniform. Let them underestimate him. Let them assume he was coming to complain. The more they dismissed him, the harder their fall would be. Before he left, he checked on his daughter again. She stirred, eyelids fluttering open. "Are you leaving?" she murmured. "Just for a bit," he said, kneeling beside her. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone." She reached for his hand. "You promise you'll fix this?" "I promise." She nodded slowly and closed her eyes once more. He stood, took a breath, and stepped into the hallway. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint scent of trimmed hedges and fresh mulch, a signature of the community's obsession with perfection. He walked past units lined with potted plants and polished numbers, passing neighbors who averted their gaze rather than acknowledge what had happened. Silence was their shield, but silence couldn't protect them forever. By the time he reached the community garden, the sky had dimmed. Solar lights flickered on along the pathways, casting long shadows. He paused near the spot where his daughter and Liam often sat after school, sketching on the low stone bench. Her small pencil marks still faintly stained the stone. Innocent, harmless, barely noticeable. Yet Vivian had built her entire cruelty on twisting something gentle into something threatening. He let the silence linger a moment before moving on. When he reached the main hall, people were already gathering, residents in pressed clothes and curated smiles, board members chatting with an affected air of authority. Vivian stood near the front, vibrant in her tailored blazer, radiant with a manufactured confidence she wielded like a shield. She noticed him immediately. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed with the smallest flicker of irritation. She liked control. His presence disrupted that. He gave her a polite nod, almost friendly, a deliberate choice. She frowned. He walked to the far side of the hall, taking a seat where he could observe not just her, but the entire room. He didn't come to fight. He came to watch, to learn, to let her expose herself before anyone else needed to lift a finger. He opened his notebook and poised his pen. The meeting hadn't even begun, and already the cracks were starting to show. He kept the notebook open on his lap as the hall filled, the low hum of conversations rising beneath the harsh white lights. Residents filtered in with rehearsed politeness, half smiles, stiff nods, the quiet shuffle of people who wanted to be seen as compliant without looking involved. From his seat along the side wall, he had a full view of the front where the board members clustered like a flock of brightly colored birds. Vivian stood at the center of them, adjusting the lapels of her blazer as she spoke quickly to the treasurer. Every gesture was poised, calculated, part of the image she curated, the woman who ran everything, who knew everything, who fixed everything. She wanted the room to revolve around her, and tonight she expected admiration. He watched her without flinching. She never looked his way again, not directly. People like her didn't make eye contact with problems they thought they had already solved. A resident stepped onto the small stage and tapped the microphone, sending soft feedback through the speakers. Conversations died down. People turned. Vivian stepped forward, smiling with the authority of someone who had practiced the expression thousands of times. "Thank you all for coming to our annual community meeting," she began. Her voice echoed crisply, carrying the confidence of someone convinced she'd already won. He rested his pen lightly against the page, waiting. She launched into updates about landscaping budgets, new maintenance policies, and increased standards for community harmony. He noticed the way some residents shifted at her wording, people who knew exactly how her standards were enforced but lacked the resolve to speak against her. He documented reactions with quiet precision. Mrs. Alden, near the back, clutched her purse tighter each time Vivian said the word compliance. A young couple exchanged uneasy glances when Vivian mentioned new fines. A father, 2 rows ahead, stiffened at the mention of child conduct oversight. Pressure points, unspoken resentments, buried fear. He made notes beside each observation, not for leverage, but for clarity. Communities like this didn't break from the outside. They cracked from the stress of internal silence. Vivian's voice carried on. "As many of you know, Maintaining our appearance and order is what keeps Silver Quail Estates one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the county. He almost smirked. Appearances. Always appearances. She flipped through her papers dramatically before continuing. We also handled several minor conduct inconsistencies this week, including a grooming standards correction to prevent distraction among our youth. The word hit him like a spark against dry wood. She was proud of what she'd done. She was framing it as an accomplishment. He kept his posture relaxed, pen poised, face unreadable. But the residents shifted again, unease rippling through the room like a silent question no one wanted to ask. He made another note. The microphone crackled as she moved on. We expect full cooperation from all families to ensure these standards are met. A murmur rose. Someone whispered. Another cleared their throat loudly. Even the board members exchanged glances. The room wasn't quite with her, and she felt it. She tightened her smile. He watched her fingers grip the edges of the podium a little too firmly. A hairline fracture in confidence. Then the treasurer stepped forward with a folder, whispering something in her ear. She stiffened, glanced toward him, briefly, involuntarily, and then looked away just as quickly. That small flicker told him everything. She wasn't as secure as she pretended. Perfect. He turned a page in his notebook, tracing a line down the center. Tonight wasn't about confrontation. It was about observation, letting her dig her own grave with her own rules. As the meeting continued, she introduced new enforcement policies, a tightened dress code for teenagers, noise restrictions, safety protocol expansions that sounded more punitive than protective. He noted each one, connecting them to past incidents. When she opened the floor for brief community feedback, no one moved, silence stretched, heavy, hesitant. She scanned the room, expecting submission. What she got instead was avoidance. People wouldn't support her, not out loud. Not now that suspicion had begun to settle. He raised his hand. A ripple of tension moved through the room. She froze. "Yes?" she asked, voice carefully neutral. He stood with slow, steady movements, as if unaware of the eyes turning toward him. "I have a question regarding the grooming standards correction you mentioned," he said calmly. "Can you clarify who authorized it?" Her smile returned, brittle around the edges. "It was within my authority as president." "And the child's consent?" he asked. Her jaw tensed. The matter was voluntary. He nodded once, making a note. "Just needed that on record." A thin line of frustration cut across her face. She didn't like being questioned, but she couldn't shut him down in front of an entire room without looking guilty. He sat again, letting the silence thicken. Residents whispered now, just faintly, but the sound carried. Vivian hurried through the rest of the agenda, tripping over words she normally delivered flawlessly. Her certainty was cracking. Perfect. When she concluded the meeting, people rose quickly, eager to escape the tension. Conversations erupted as soon as feet hit the aisles. Some glanced at him, others at her, most at the ground. He remained seated until nearly everyone had exited. The hall emptied slowly. Vivienne avoided him, speaking to board members with forced brightness. But her eyes flicked toward him each time someone walked away from her, earlier than expected. She felt it now. The shift. The pull of something she couldn't name. He closed his notebook, slid the pen inside, and rose. He walked out with steady steps, letting her watch him leave. She needed to feel uncertain tonight. She needed to feel the ground shift beneath her, because the moment she lost her footing, everything she'd built on fear would collapse. He stepped out into the cool evening air, letting the door of the main hall swing shut behind him. The muffled conversations faded as the hallway lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the quiet path. He didn't rush. Every movement remained slow, measured, the kind of practiced calm that made people underestimate him. Vivienne's eyes had followed him as he left, but he didn't look back. Not yet. The night breeze carried the scent of trimmed hedges and damp soil, an artificial peace crafted by the HOA to hide the rot underneath. He walked toward the maintenance shed, not because he needed tools, but because he needed space to think, to map the next step. The community meeting had revealed exactly what he needed: unease, doubt, discomfort. Vivienne's performance hadn't landed cleanly, and the residents' shifting expressions confirmed it. He reached the shed and unlocked it quietly. Inside, Faint light from a single bulb illuminated shelves of equipment, boxes of spare parts, old logs, and a stack of trash bags from the afternoon's cleanup. As he stepped in, something caught his attention. One of the bags wasn't tied properly. A few strands of hair, long and light, spilled across the edge of the black plastic. His chest tightened for a brief moment. He pulled the bag open with slow, deliberate hands. Inside, beneath scraps of paper towels and discarded packaging, lay his daughter's cut braid, the one forced from her without permission, without humanity. Seeing it in the trash confirmed everything he already knew. To Vivian, it wasn't a violation. It was disposal. He reached in and lifted the braid gently. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of the humiliation carved into a child's identity. He turned it over slowly in his hands, each strand reflecting the harsh bulb overhead. This was more than evidence. It was emotional truth, a symbol of the cruelty inflicted and the disregard behind it. He placed it carefully on the workbench, smoothing out the tangled ends. His fingers lingered on it for a moment, not shaking, not trembling, just steady, the way they always were when the stakes rose. He pulled out his phone and photographed it next to the trash bag, capturing everything: the condition, the placement, the time stamp. Then he wrapped the braid in a clean cloth and folded it with deliberate care. Tonight wasn't about exposing Vivian yet. Tonight was about building something she couldn't outrun. He set the braid aside and headed toward the corner shelf where old maintenance logs were stacked. Some were dusty, some were newer. All were records she never expected him to understand or use. He flipped through them until he found the entries corresponding to the time she'd taken Mara into the standards room. Access signatures, override codes, user-specific entries. There it was. Room access override, admin level, V-cross. He slid the logbook into his backpack without hesitation. Another piece of the puzzle, another line of truth. As he gathered the items, the shed door creaked open. He didn't tense, just turned slightly, already aware of who it was from the soft shuffle of her footsteps. Mrs. Alden stood in the doorway, wrapped in a light cardigan, worry etched into her features. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here," she said softly. He nodded once. "Everything all right?" "I couldn't sleep," she murmured. "And I thought you should know." People were whispering after the meeting. Something felt off. "They're starting to wonder what happened to your girl." "Good," he said quietly. She hesitated, clutching the door frame. "Some of us saw her earlier. We didn't say anything because we were afraid of crossing Vivian. But now, after the way she talked tonight, I think people are starting to question her." He studied her expression. Fear mixed with guilt, but also something else, conscience. "Did anyone else say anything specific?" he asked. She nodded. "The Thompsons mentioned they saw Vivian dragging someone toward the standards room earlier that day. They didn't know it was Mara at the time, but they regret not stepping in." He wrote it down mentally. "Thank you." She gave a small, sad smile. "Your daughter didn't deserve this." He nodded again. No anger, only resolve. As she left, he exhaled slowly, turning back to the workbench. The braid sat there unassuming, fragile, but powerful. This was the keystone of the emotional narrative. Facts built the case. Emotion built the truth behind it. And when both aligned, denial became impossible. He packed the braid into his bag, tucked between the logbook and notebook. As he zipped it closed, the faint hum of the streetlights filled the silence around him. Outside, sprinklers switched on in rhythmic arcs across the lawns. Perfect timing, perfect appearance, everything in this community curated to show harmony. He stepped out of the shed and locked it behind him. Walking back toward his unit, he noticed two board members speaking in hushed tones near the walkway. Glancing his way, shifting nervously when he passed. The meeting had done its work. Seeds of doubt had sprouted, and that was how exposure began. Quietly, beneath the surface. When he reached the unit door, the lights inside were still dim. His daughter lay curled beneath the blanket, finally resting. He placed his bag beneath the table, sat on the floor beside her couch, and watched her breathe. She had no idea that her cut braid now lay at the center of something far bigger, something that would eventually dismantle the woman who hurt her. He wasn't thinking about victory, he wasn't thinking about revenge, he was thinking about dignity. And dignity was something he protected with precision. He stayed seated beside the couch for a long while, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his daughter's breathing. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that wrapped itself around him like a reminder of everything he'd chosen in life. The calm, the steadiness, the distance from who he used to be. But peace only held value when the world behaved. Tonight had proven it didn't. He rose with careful movements, making sure not to wake her, and stepped into the kitchen to pour a glass of water. The clock on the microwave blinked past. Midnight. The mandatory meeting had drained the neighborhood of its artificial charm. The hall was dark now, the trimmed lawns still, sprinklers off, the community taking one collective breath before pretending everything was fine. Again come morning. He leaned against the counter, sipping water, replaying every detail of the night. Vivienne's tightening smile, residents shifting uneasily, the treasurer whispering in her ear. She had felt the pressure. People like her didn't know how to hide panic once it seeped through the first crack in their control. The meeting had given him all the intel he needed, but tomorrow, he'd need something more. That's when the low hum of the building power made him pause. The lights flickered, once, twice. Then a brief surge cut through the hallway outside. He set the glass down and walked toward the breaker panel in the corner of the unit. A trained instinct kicked in. Flickers like that rarely came from faulty wiring in a modern building. They came from load errors, overdraw, system strain. He grabbed his maintenance badge and tablet and slipped outside, locking the door quietly behind him. The hall was dimmer than usual. Emergency runners flickered to life along the floorboards, evidence of a deeper power issue. Down the hall, 2 residents stood in their doorways whispering. Someone from the second unit muttered about the pool lights going out earlier. Another complained that the clubhouse shutters refused to open. He didn't stop to talk. He turned the corner, heading straight for the utility corridor where the maintenance breaker was housed. The keypad panel blinked with a red error code. Override failure, admin access locked. The same pattern he'd seen earlier on the camera logs. He exhaled slowly. Controlled. Predictable. Vivienne was trying to restrict access again. 2 days ago, he would have walked away, left it for morning. But this wasn't about residents needing power. This was about understanding patterns, her patterns. Every decision she made, every override, every block built a profile. He'd mapped people far more dangerous than her using this exact same process. A door opened behind him. Mr. Boone, a nervous resident with a tendency to over-explain everything, stepped out. "Hey, are you checking the power?" The clubhouse screens went black during the board's after-meeting session. He nodded. "I'm on it." Boone leaned closer, voice hushed. "I saw the president go in there. She looked upset. Real upset." He made a mental note. Boone wasn't reliable, but frightened people often blurted honest observations. "Thanks," he said simply. He moved to the wall panel. The locks were in override, but the system itself wasn't complicated. He bypassed the first error by holding down 2 diagnostic keys at once, accessing the internal code he'd memorized months ago. He rarely used it, mostly for rerouting minor outages. But tonight, he needed to see what had been tampered with. The console clicked open. He connected his tablet to the circuit monitor, watching the data populate. Overdraw on Sector 4. Voltage imbalance from the clubhouse. Someone inside the locked room was using equipment past the permitted hour. He pulled the system map up further and froze when he saw it. Security feed scrub, fail, auth v cross. She'd tried to wipe something, and the system had failed mid-process due to the power surge. There it was, a crack he didn't expect this soon. He didn't smile, but he felt something shift inside, an acknowledgement that her attempts to bury everything were beginning to work against her. Footsteps echoed softly. A flashlight beam approached. He turned slightly as Officer Reed, the younger of the 2 security patrol officers, came into view. "Hey," Reed said, "we're getting multiple complaints, power glitches. Residents freak out if the pool lights go down for 5 minutes." He nodded. "Clubhouse overdraw." Reed exhaled sharply. "Figures. The president's been in a mood since the meeting." He observed Reed carefully. "Did she instruct security to lock down the camera feeds?" Reed swallowed, eyes shifting. We're told it's routine maintenance." "Routine maintenance doesn't override admin logs," he replied quietly. Reed stiffened, knowing he'd just revealed something without meaning to. Another pattern, another weakness. Vivian controlled through fear, but fear always frayed under pressure. He closed the breaker panel and straightened. "I'll stabilize the system. Don't worry the residents yet." Relief washed over Reed's face. "Right. Thanks." As Reed walked away, he returned his attention to the console. The scrub failure meant one critical thing. Remnants of the footage were still recoverable. He didn't have authority to access them, but someone soon would. He logged everything into his notebook when he got back into the apartment. Faulty overrides, unauthorized camera scrubs, power misuse, witness behavior. It all painted a picture leading to the same conclusion. Vivian was spiraling. And spiraling leaders always made catastrophic mistakes right before exposure. He set the notebook aside and checked on his daughter once more. She curled deeper into her blanket, unaware of the storm outside or the quiet battle opening around her. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't acting impulsively. He was preparing. And the more she tried to hide the truth, the brighter the truth would burn once revealed. He sat in the dim light of the living room, notebook open, the page filled with neat lines of handwriting summarizing the night's discoveries, the failed camera scrub, the overridden access logs, the power surge caused by her tampering. Individually, they were suspicious. Together, they formed the kind of pattern he recognized instantly: someone rushing, someone afraid, someone trying to cover a mistake faster than they could hide it. His daughter shifted in her sleep, and he lowered the notebook slightly, watching her small form curled under the blanket. The towel had finally slipped away from her shoulders, revealing the jagged, uneven patches along her scalp. He reached forward and gently rearranged the blanket so it didn't rub against the sensitive skin. She didn't wake, but her breathing steadied, as if she sensed him near. He sat back against the couch, closing the notebook softly. Tomorrow would be a turning point. He could feel it. Patterns like these always reached a breaking point. Either the one hiding the truth broke first, or the truth broke everything open. And Vivian was close, very close. The night outside was still when a faint vibration buzzed across the floor. His phone lit up with an unknown number. He narrowed his eyes at the timestamp. 2:13 a.m. He let it ring twice, thinking, listening. Then he answered. "Ethan?" A familiar voice said, steady, lower, edged with controlled authority. He felt something tighten in his chest. "Rowan?" His older brother didn't waste time. "You still at Silver Quail?" "Yes." "I'm 10 minutes out." Rowan's tone held the unmistakable command of someone used to being obeyed. "We're serving a warrant on a resident connected to a fraud ring. The task force is staging near the east gate." Of all the nights, of all the hours, Rowan arriving now wasn't coincidence. It wasn't luck. It was timing. Brutal, perfect timing. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he asked quietly. "Because I didn't know until an hour ago," Rowan replied. "This case finally cracked, and Silver Quail is tangled deeper than I expected." He absorbed that silently, a fraud investigation running parallel to everything happening in his own home. Arrogance layered on top of corruption. It fit too perfectly. Vivian had always acted untouchable, the kind of arrogance built on a foundation no one was supposed to examine. Rowan continued. "Are you outside or inside?" "Inside. My daughter's asleep." A brief pause. "She okay?" He looked at her again, peaceful now, but wounded in a way no child should ever be. "She will be." Another beat of silence. Rowan understood what those words meant. "I'm coming to you first," his brother said. He hung up without ceremony. Ethan slipped on his jacket, checked the lock again, and stepped into the hallway, notebook tucked under his arm. He didn't want Rowan knocking and waking his daughter, and he definitely didn't want the U.S Marshals walking into the living space where she slept. He took the stairs instead of the elevator, descending into the cool night air. By the time he reached the edge of the complex, the low rumble of engines echoed from the street. 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop beyond the entrance. Doors opened, tactical boots hit pavement. Men and women in Marshall windbreakers fanned out with quiet, coordinated precision. Rowan stepped out last, tall, steady, the kind of presence that carried its own gravity. Even now, years since they'd served side by side, Rowan's controlled posture felt like a reminder of the world Ethan had walked away from. Rowan's gaze landed on him instantly. "You look the same," Rowan said, approaching. You don't, Ethan replied. His brother exhaled in a way that might have been a laugh if the moment was lighter. But Rowan wasn't here for family talk. His eyes scanned Ethan's expression, then the hard lines in his jaw. What happened? Rowan asked quietly. Vivian Cross happened, Ethan answered. He handed Rowan the notebook, opened to the page where the braid was wrapped carefully in cloth. Rowan lifted it with the care of someone handling evidence. His eyes darkened. Rowan's voice lowered. She did this? Yes. And you have footage? Not yet. She tampered with the system. Rowan flipped through the notes, understanding them instantly. Override logs, power manipulation, scrub failure. He looked up. You tracked all this in one night? I've tracked worse with less. Rowan didn't comment, but appreciation flickered across his face. You want this handled the right way? That's why I called you. You didn't call me. You showed up anyway. Rowan gave a short nod, one he only used when he accepted the gravity of a situation. All right, I'll add her to the internal inquiry list. If she messed with security systems, that's federal. If she harmed a minor, that's state. And if she tried to hide both, Ethan added, that's everything. Rowan's jaw tightened. Show me the security office. Ethan nodded once and led the way, keeping a steady pace. The marshals followed at a distance, checking perimeters, sweeping corners. When they reached the clubhouse, Rowan studied the locked door, then glanced at Ethan. She won't expect this. She didn't expect me, Ethan said. Rowan unlocked the door with a federal override key. Inside, the dark room hummed with machines. The blank screens flickered as systems attempted a reboot. A red warning flashed on the monitor. Partial data restore in progress. Rowan's lips tightened. She messed up her own cover-up. Fear makes people sloppy, Ethan replied. Rowan turned to him. This is enough. We'll get the rest. For the first time since the incident, Ethan allowed a slow breath of relief to settle in his lungs. Not victory, not satisfaction, just the steady knowledge that the truth now had momentum. Tomorrow, the shift would begin. Rowan stepped deeper into the security room, the dim glow from the monitors casting sharp angles across his face. He scanned the rows of equipment with a practiced sweep, already assessing what he could pull, what he could salvage, and what Vivian had tried and failed to erase. Ethan stood just behind. Him, arms folded, gaze steady, watching the machines cycle through a slow, glitching reboot. A restored fragment blinked onto the main monitor, a corrupted thumbnail, streaked with static, but unmistakably showing the hallway leading to the standards room. Rowan zoomed in, studying the timestamp. This is the window, Rowan murmured. She tried to wipe the footage starting exactly 10 minutes after this. Ethan nodded once. I knew she acted fast, but not that fast. When people panic, Rowan replied quietly, speed becomes a confession. Rowan keyed in a command on the console and began isolating fragments. Some were damaged beyond recognition, but others contained enough metadata to reconstruct the sequence. The system whirred as it processed his request. Ethan walked the perimeter of the room, studying every detail, noting each indicator on the machines, every access alert, every trail she'd left behind. The security room smelled faintly of dust, warm plastic, and desperation. The desperation of someone who thought wiping a camera feed could erase consequences. Look at this, Rowan called. Ethan returned to the console. A partially restored clip played, frames stuttering, broken by static. But the essentials were there. Vivian in the hallway, speaking sharply to someone off frame. Then Mara stepping into view, hesitant and visibly distressed. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't look away. The footage flickered again, but Rowan froze it just before the door closed behind Vivian and Mara. Even if the inside footage is corrupted, Rowan said, this alone proves she took her in, without a parent, without consent. And she lied about it, Ethan added, voice hard. That's the part that matters most in court, Rowan said. Intent and deception. Ethan's hand curled into a fist at his side, but slowly relaxed. He wasn't here to explode. He was here to observe, to calculate, to allow the truth to work the way truth always did, quietly at first, then suddenly devastating. Rowan glanced at him. You all right? I'm fine, Ethan replied. I'm just thinking. Thinking what? That she believes she still has control? Rowan huffed a quiet acknowledgement. People like her always do. A fresh alert pinged on the console. Restoration complete. External audio fragments. Rowan clicked through, opening the recovered sound clips. The first few seconds were incomprehensible static. Then a voice cut through. Distraction, violation, wrong influence. Vivienne. Rowan's expression hardened. She's digging her own grave. Good, Ethan said. Let her keep digging. Another alert chimed softly on the console. Public address system available. Rowan raised an eyebrow. She didn't lock this down? She's sloppy when she's scared, Ethan replied. Rowan shut the monitor off and stepped back. This is enough for now. We'll pull the rest tomorrow. I've got the team running traces on her access codes. If she manipulated logs in a way that intersects with our warrant targets, she's going to have a much bigger problem. Ethan nodded. I assumed as much. They left the security room and locked it behind them. The cool night air greeted them in a quiet hush, broken only by the soft crunch of gravel under their boots. The marshals were stationed strategically along the pathways, scanning the layout with disciplined efficiency. Rowan turned to him. Go get some sleep. I'll handle the rest tonight. Sleep isn't the priority right now, Ethan said. It's your daughter, Rowan countered. Your clarity is part of protecting her. Ethan didn't respond, but Rowan wasn't wrong. He walked toward the apartment with steady steps. His daughter needed him clear-headed. She needed him steady. She needed him whole. When he reached the door, he paused, listening. The gentle sound of her breathing filtered through the thin walls. The world felt still, poised, like the moment before a storm breaks. He slipped back inside. The lights were dim. The air held the warmth from earlier. He removed his jacket and draped it over the chair, then checked his bag. Logbook, braid, notes, all protected. He moved to the window, drawing the curtain slightly aside. The walkway was empty. The lawns were silver under the moonlight. Everything looked peaceful, and for the first time in days, he felt like the scales were shifting. Vivienne believed herself untouchable, but evidence didn't bow to authority. He turned back toward the living room and knelt beside the couch. His daughter stirred, eyes barely open. You're back, she whispered. I'm here, he said softly. Did something happen? Yes, he answered truthfully. Something good. She closed her eyes again, reassured. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead and rose, moving quietly to the table. He opened his notebook to a clean page, writing one sentence across the top. Tomorrow begins. He tapped the pen twice against the paper, a habit from a life she'd never seen, and closed the notebook. Before heading to bed, he paused once more by the window and breathed in the stillness outside. That stillness would break soon. And when it did, the truth would land exactly where it needed to. Subscribe with the bell on, because tomorrow's reveal is the beginning of everything. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight settle. Then he turned off the light. The apartment was still dark when he opened his eyes, long before sunrise. Years of conditioning made waking effortless. Silence, awareness, and immediate clarity settling into his mind before his body fully moved. He shifted only enough to check the couch. His daughter was curled in the same position, breathing softly, wrapped in the blanket like she was trying to hide inside it. She didn't stir. Good. She needed sleep far, more than he did. He rose quietly, sliding the notebook from the table and stepping into the faint glow of the kitchen light. The words he'd written last night, "Tomorrow begins," sat at the top of the page like a promise he intended to keep. He set the notebook aside and poured a glass of water, letting the coolness ground him. Today wasn't about confrontation. It was about momentum. Truth had already begun surfacing. His job was simply to guide it into the light. A soft vibration broke the silence. His phone, a text from Rowan. Team is prepping. Keep your daughter home today. I'll update you soon. Short, direct, exactly like his brother. He typed back, understood. He stepped to the window, drawing the curtain aside. The HOA grounds were bathed in the early blue-gray of dawn. Sprinklers danced across the lawns. Maintenance lights flickered on along the walkways. The world woke the same way it always did here. Clean, polished, predictable. But today, the truth was woven through its foundations, waiting for the right amount of pressure. He unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway, grabbing his maintenance toolkit. Being seen working early would help keep Vivienne's guard down. She expected him to stay in his place. Let her expect it. Underestimation was always his greatest ally. He walked the long path toward the clubhouse, pausing occasionally to adjust sprinklers, check a flickering lamp, or tighten a loose bolt. Residents began emerging from their units in slippers and robes, heading toward morning walks or early commutes. Some glanced at him with tentative interest, something between curiosity and guilt. The shift was subtle, but real. People who hadn't met his eyes yesterday now looked at him with quiet hesitation, as if they sensed something moving beneath the surface. At the clubhouse entrance, he heard footsteps behind him. "Ethan?" He turned slightly. It was Mr. Boone, hands shoved nervously into his jacket pockets. The man glanced around before speaking. "There were conversations last night. People are starting to ask what Vivian really did." He waited. Boone swallowed. "After you spoke at the meeting, something felt wrong. And when the power went out earlier, people panicked. They're blaming her. They're saying she's slipping." He nodded once. "She is." Boone exhaled shakily. "If you need someone to speak on your behalf, I can." "Not yet," he replied. "Wait." Boone blinked. "Wait for what?" "For the truth to land where it needs to." Boone didn't fully understand, but he nodded and stepped back, relieved to have done something, even if it was small. Ethan turned and unlocked the clubhouse maintenance door with steady hands. Inside, the building hummed faintly. The security room remained sealed, federal lock engaged after last night's discovery. He moved past it, checking switches and control panels, ensuring nothing would raise suspicion. The day needed to appear normal, even as pressure built inch by inch. He circled through the lobby, clipboard in hand, marking notations, touching up a scuffed baseboard with a quick swipe of paint. Residents entering the gym or office glanced at him, perhaps expecting him to flinch or avoid eye contact. He didn't. He nodded politely, always calm, always composed. Around mid-morning, the HOA board gathered for an impromptu meeting near the reception counter. He didn't approach. Instead, he worked from a distance, listening without looking like he was listening. "No," she reassured me. "Everything was handled," one board member insisted. "Handled?" whispered another. "Did you see her last night? She practically bolted out of the hall. She's under a lot of pressure. That doesn't excuse—" He tuned out the rest. This wasn't the time to react. It was simply information, confirmation of the cracks forming. As he moved toward the side door, a familiar voice stopped him. "So, you're everywhere this morning." "Vivienne." He turned slowly. She stood with her arms crossed, posture tight, tension radiating beneath her polished exterior. Her blazer was immaculate, but her eyes gave her away. Red-rimmed, restless, watching the room for threats like someone accustomed to control slipping through her fingers. "Maintenance starts early," he said evenly. She forced a smile. "You caused quite a disruption last night." "No," he replied calmly. "I asked a question." Her smile wavered. "Your tone was inappropriate, and your insinuations were accurate." She bristled, lowering her voice. "If you continue this behavior, we'll have to—" He took a step closer, not aggressive, just enough for her to realize she couldn't intimidate him. "You'll what?" She froze. The room quieted. For the first time, she saw it. The stillness in him wasn't weakness, it was restraint. "I'd choose your next steps carefully," he said, voice low but audible. "You're running out of places to hide." Her mouth opened, then closed. She spun away quickly, heels clicking sharply across the tile as she retreated toward the board meeting. He watched her go, then turned back to his clipboard as if nothing had happened. Minutes later, his phone buzzed again. A message from Rowan. "We recovered the full hallway clip, and part of the audio. Meeting with local authorities at noon, be ready." He read it twice, letting each word settle. Today wasn't the beginning of the end, it was the middle of the collapse. He closed the clipboard, exhaled slowly, and walked toward the exit with steady, purposeful steps. Everything was moving exactly where it needed to. He stepped outside the clubhouse, the sunlight brighter now, casting sharp edges along the walkways. His phone remained in his hand, Rowan's message still glowing across the screen. Meeting with local authorities at noon. It meant the machinery of truth had begun grinding forward, slow at first, but once it moved, it never stopped. He put the phone in his pocket and started toward his unit. His stride remained calm, deliberate, but inside, something had begun shifting, pressure tightening in the chest. a familiar weight he had carried long before this neighborhood, long before this quiet life. Today the truth would step out from the shadows. As he crossed the courtyard, several residents paused mid-conversation when they saw him. Some offered small nods, others tightened their grips on their coffee cups, discomfort written plainly across their faces. They were beginning to understand that something was very wrong, and for the first time, they weren't looking to Vivian for reassurance. They were looking at him. He didn't stop. He didn't acknowledge them. He simply walked. When he reached his unit, he unlocked the door quietly. His daughter sat at the table, drawing, her uneven hair pulled softly to one side to hide the worst of the patches. She lifted her eyes when she heard him enter. "You're home early?" she said softly. "For a bit," he replied. "You sleep all right?" She nodded, though the tiredness lingered beneath her eyes. He sat beside her, studying the drawing, a small garden scene, simple pencil lines forming the stone bench she'd once shared with Liam. Her fingers hesitated over the paper. "Does it hurt?" he asked gently. She touched the back of her head. "Only when I think about it." He swallowed. "You won't have to think about it much longer." Her gaze lifted, full of cautious hope. "Did something happen?" "Something is happening," he said, "and soon people will know the truth." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words like fragile warmth. He stood again, moving to the counter to pour her a glass of juice. When he returned it to the table, another buzz vibrated through his phone. Another message from Rowan. "Sheriff on board. Meeting moved up. 30 minutes. He responded with a single word. "Coming." He touched his daughter's shoulder. "I have to step out for a little while. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me or Rowan." She nodded. "Okay." He waited until the lock clicked before heading down the hallway. The walk toward the security building felt heavier than usual, not from fear, but from the quiet certainty that they were nearing the fulcrum of everything, where the weight shifted, where the hinge turned, where exposure stopped being preparation and became reality. When he approached the parking lot near the clubhouse, he saw Rowan standing beside the sheriff's patrol SUV. Sheriff Donovan, broad-shouldered, serious, not the type to let an HOA intimidate him, spoke with two marshals while glancing intermittently at his clipboard. Rowan looked up as he approached. "We've got enough," he said. "The footage, the audio, the witness patterns, and your notes filled every gap." Ethan nodded. "What's the next step?" Rowan motioned toward the sheriff. "He'll bring her in for questioning. I'll handle the digital evidence. You should be ready for her reaction." "I'm ready." "She's going to push back hard. People like her collapse loud." "I know," Ethan said. Rowan studied him briefly. "You're steady." "Always." Donovan approached, tipping his hat slightly. "Mr. Calder, I'm sorry you're going through this. What happened to your daughter? It's not just wrong, it's criminal." Ethan remained calm. "Thank you for taking it seriously. We'll confront her with the footage first," Donovan said. "If she tries to obstruct, it'll only make things worse for her." "She will," Ethan replied quietly. "She can't admit her own mistakes." Donovan nodded grimly. "Then she'll fall hard." The group moved toward the clubhouse. Residents nearby began whispering as the sheriff and marshals crossed the courtyard. Uniforms, badges, quiet authority rippling through the atmosphere like a warning. Vivian appeared in the doorway before they reached it. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the sheriff, but she smoothed her expression quickly, forcing an elegant smile. "Sheriff Donovan, I wasn't expecting visitors." Donovan didn't return the smile. "We need to speak with you." "Of course," she replied, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "About what?" Rowan stepped forward, holding a tablet. "About this." He tapped the screen. The hallway footage appeared, distorted but clear enough. Vivienne leading Mara toward the standards room. Mara visibly distressed. Vivienne blocking the door. The color drained from her face. "That footage is taken out of context," she said quickly. "She came willingly. Audio says otherwise," Rowan replied. He tapped again. The restored fragments played. Her voice, sharp, commanding, cold. "Distracting, violation, fix this now." Her lips parted, a breath caught between denial and panic. "That audio is manipulated." "It's from your system," Rowan said. "And your override logs," Donovan added. "We have your code signatures." Residents gathering nearby exchanged shocked glances. Some gasped softly. Others stared at Vivienne with a mounting sense of betrayal. Vivienne stepped back. "This is a misinterpretation. I am responsible for maintaining standards. You're responsible for the safety of residents," Donovan cut in, "not harming minors." Her mask cracked. "She was disrupting—" "She's a child," Ethan said, voice even. Vivienne flinched as though the calmness was sharper than shouting. Donovan stepped forward. "Vivienne Cross, you need to come with us for questioning." Her breath hitched. This can't—" Rowan stepped in gently but firmly. "It's over." Her eyes darted wildly, toward the board members, toward passing residents, toward the security cameras she once controlled. None of them could save her now. As Donovan guided her toward the patrol SUV, murmurs rippled through the crowd, shock, anger, dawning realization. Ethan didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched the truth take its rightful place. Today wasn't the end, but it was the moment she finally lost control. The sheriff's SUV door slammed shut, muffling Vivienne's frantic protests as the engine rumbled to life. Residents stood frozen in the courtyard, sunlight catching on their shocked expressions. Some whispered, some folded their arms defensively. A few stepped closer to one another, as if proximity might help them make sense of what they had just witnessed. The atmosphere felt stripped, clean of illusion, heavy with truth. Ethan didn't linger on her departure. He simply watched until the SUV turned the corner and disappeared from view. Rowan stood beside him, hands on his hips, scanning the gathering crowd in a way that assessed potential threats, emotional temperature, and structural stability all at once. Old habits never truly left either of them. After a long breath, Rowan murmured, "It won't stay quiet for long." "It shouldn't," Ethan replied. The nearest group of residents shifted awkwardly. Mrs. Alden approached first, her eyes misting. I didn't know it was this bad," she murmured. "We all suspected things, but not this." He nodded. She hid behind authority. Most people don't challenge that. Others stepped forward, a man he recognized from the gym, a mother who often walked her toddler in the mornings, the Thompsons who lived across the garden. Each of them looked shaken, guilty, ashamed that they hadn't looked closer, hadn't intervened sooner. The mother spoke first. "Your daughter, she didn't deserve any of this." "No child does," Ethan said evenly. A few residents nodded, humbled by the statement. There was no anger in his tone, only an unshakable honesty that cut deeper than accusations ever could. Rowan cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "There will be a formal investigation. Anyone with knowledge or suspicion regarding HOA misconduct should contact the sheriff's office." People exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't how things worked here. Their community, once glossy and controlled, now felt fragile, exposed. But in that vulnerability, truth finally had room to breathe. Ethan stepped back, ready to return home, when a voice stopped him. "Wait, Ethan." He turned. It was Liam, Vivienne's son, standing near the edge of the walkway. He looked smaller than Ethan remembered, shoulders tense, hair tousled from rushing outside. The boy swallowed. I didn't know she did that to your daughter." Ethan waited. She told me I wasn't allowed to talk to Mara anymore," Liam continued. "She said Mara was a distraction, but I never said anything like that. I like sitting with her after school." There it was, the quiet truth, the real one. Not the invented distraction, but a child's innocent friendship, weaponized by a controlling parent. He leaned down slightly so Liam didn't have to look up so far. "None of this was your fault." Liam blinked hard, relief trembling beneath his expression. Is your daughter okay?" "She's healing," Ethan said, "and hearing that will help." Liam nodded, stepping back. The tension in his posture eased, and for the first time, the child no longer looked afraid. He looked freed. Rowan touched Ethan's arm lightly. "We should talk inside. There's more." He followed Rowan to the unit, unlocking the door quietly. His daughter lifted her head from the couch as they entered. Her eyes widened at the sight of Rowan. "Uncle Rowan?" Rowan softened, kneeling beside her. "Hey, kiddo." She instantly reached for him, and he hugged her carefully, mindful of her scalp. "Did it work?" she whispered. "It's working," Rowan said. We're just getting started." She clung to him for a moment longer, then settled back under the blanket with a shaky exhale. Ethan watched the interaction with a quiet familiarity. Rowan had always carried a certain gravity, firm, protective, grounding in a way few people understood. Rowan stood and motioned for Ethan to step aside. They moved to the dining table, lowering their voices. "You should know," Rowan began. "The digital forensics team pulled more than we expected." "How much more?" Ethan asked. "Everything inside the room," Rowan replied. "She didn't wipe it. She corrupted it by accident. The original feed was backed up before the malfunction." Ethan felt the air shift inside him. Not relief, not triumph. Something quieter. Something final. "Sheriff Donovan is preparing charges now," Rowan continued. "Child endangerment, tampering with evidence, abuse of authority, and the financial misconduct tied to our warrant might link back to her too." "Good," Ethan said simply. Rowan nodded toward the notebook on the table. "Your documentation filled every gap. It's airtight." He lifted the notebook and flipped to the page where the braid was wrapped. Rowan's voice lowered. This hits harder than any footage. It's why I kept it." Rowan closed the notebook gently. "By tonight, the whole board will know she's done." "The board?" Ethan asked. "They're part of the audit. They'll be questioned. Some of them might resign." Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He didn't revel in her downfall. He only asked, "What happens now?" Rowan exhaled. "Now the community learns who you really are." As if on cue, a soft knock sounded on the door. Ethan opened it to find the Thompsons standing there, both looking remorseful. "We want to give statements," Mr. Thompson said. "We regret not stepping in sooner." "We're so sorry for what happened to your daughter," Mrs. Thompson added, voice trembling. Ethan stepped aside, letting them speak with Rowan. More knocks soon followed. Mrs. Alden again, the father from the gym, the young couple from the meeting. One by one, neighbors came forward, shame written in their lowered eyes, courage written in their willingness to finally speak. It didn't undo what happened, but it mattered. Ethan glanced toward his daughter. She watched all of it with a mixture of confusion and cautious relief. She didn't fully understand yet, but she saw something new, the community acknowledging the harm, not denying it. Rowan finished gathering the statements and stood. "By evening," he said, "this place will shift." Ethan nodded once. He wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about restoration, and restoration was finally underway. The statements continued for nearly an hour, each resident stepping into the apartment with a mix of guilt and resolve, each one contributing another thread to the truth Ethan had been weaving since the moment his daughter walked home, half-shaved and broken. By the time the last neighbor left, the atmosphere inside the unit had shifted entirely. What had once been a place of quiet isolation had become the center of something heavier: accountability, awakening, consequence. Rowan gathered the last signed statement into a folder and closed it with finality. "Donovan's team is processing everything now," he said. "By tonight, formal charges will be public." Ethan nodded. "How long before she realizes there's no way out?" "She realized it the second she saw the footage," Rowan replied. "This is just the part where reality catches up." His daughter watched from the couch, wrapped in a blanket but sitting straighter now. For the first time since the incident, her expression held something brighter. Fragile but present. A kind of safety she hadn't felt since before Vivian dragged her into that room. Rowan approached her with a gentle nod. "You were brave," he told her. "What happened wasn't your fault, and you won't ever deal with her again." She swallowed, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Will she go to jail?" "Probably," he said honestly. "And if she doesn't, she'll never have authority over anyone again." That seemed to be enough. She leaned against the pillow and exhaled deeply. Rowan turned to Ethan. "There's a formal board meeting this evening. Donovan and I will be present. They're dissolving her position and conducting a full leadership review." "She won't show," Ethan said. "She doesn't have to," Rowan replied. "Her absence will say everything." He gathered his files, then paused. "You should be there. Residents need to see you, not angry, not vengeful, just the man you are." Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at his daughter. "Will you be okay for a couple hours?" She nodded. "I want you to go." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'll be right back afterward." When Rowan left, the apartment fell quiet again. Ethan gathered his notebook and the wrapped braid, the symbolic heart of everything. He debated whether to bring it. In the end, he slid it back into the drawer. The community didn't need to see it. Its purpose had already been served. He stepped outside, locking the door gently behind him. The walk toward the hall felt different this time. Residents lingered along porches and sidewalks, some looking away in shame, others lifting hesitant hands in small gestures of apology. He acknowledged each with a calm nod. He didn't need their guilt. He didn't need their praise. He just needed his daughter's dignity restored. When he reached the community hall, a quiet murmur filled the entrance. Board members stood stiffly beside rows of chairs. Several residents filled the seats already, whispering among themselves with tension etched on their faces. The sheriff stood near the front. Rowan stood beside him, arms crossed, posture steady. Ethan entered without hesitation. A few heads turned, conversations paused. Something like respect settled into the silence. The treasurer cleared his throat nervously. "We thank everyone for coming. Given the circumstances surrounding President Cross, today's meeting will address her removal and the reassignment of HOA leadership." The murmurs grew louder, and, the treasurer continued, "We want to publicly acknowledge the harm done to one of our own residents." Ethan didn't react, but the air shifted. Mrs. Alden stood suddenly, voice trembling. "We ignored things we shouldn't have. We let her do whatever she wanted because we were afraid. And a child paid the price for our silence." A father in the second row added, "We let her turn this place into something ugly. We're sorry." More voices followed, apologies, confessions, acknowledgments of the power imbalance they had allowed to fester. It wasn't absolution, but it mattered. Rowan stepped forward, his voice firm. "The investigation is underway. Evidence is secured. Charges will be filed. There will be structural changes here, including oversight and compliance monitoring to prevent abuses like this from happening again." He gestured toward Ethan. "This community owes a debt to a man who remained calm, collected, and precise when others would have lost control. His evidence, his discipline, and his clarity made this investigation possible." Ethan felt dozens of eyes on him. He didn't shift, didn't shrink, didn't bask. He simply said, "My daughter deserved to feel safe here." The words settled heavily. The treasurer stepped forward. "From today forward, this community will rebuild, and the first step is accountability." He read Vivian's list of violations, her suspension, her removal, and the pending legal charges. The room listened in tense silence, some vindicated, some horrified, all changed. When the meeting adjourned, several residents approached him quietly, some with apologies, some with gratitude, some simply wanting to offer support. He accepted each with quiet grace. But he didn't stay long. He walked back to the apartment, each step lighter than the one before. When he opened the door, his daughter looked up from the couch, hope flickering across her face. "Is it over?" He knelt beside her. "Yes," he said softly. "It's over." She leaned into him, small hands clutching his shirt. He held her in silence, the weight of days of tension finally lifting. This wasn't victory. It was restoration. Justice had found its way through truth, not noise. Through calm, not chaos. And it had been enough. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?